Hey guys, tonight we step back into a time when the sun rises over dusty lanes, and the smell of baked bread, hay, and a hint of livestock greets you as you trudge toward the village fair. You probably won't survive this if you're expecting polished pavements or air conditioning. But that's the charm: mud squelching underfoot, the occasional squawk from a chicken fleeing a cart, and the excited chatter of villagers already gathered. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. So I'm curious where in the world you're imagining yourself standing in the middle of all this chaos. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step onto the uneven cobbles, feeling each stone press against your boots. The village is waking. Carts creak as merchants roll in with goods from nearby towns and distant lands. The air carries a patchwork of smells: sweet honey cakes baking in clay ovens, pungent cheeses stacked high, and the earthy musk of animals being herded into pens. A goat nudges at a barrel of apples, and you swear you hear it grumble like it's judging your choices for breakfast. Some historians still argue whether these fairs began as purely religious festivals tied to saints' days or were originally just market gatherings designed to move excess crops. Either way, you can sense that the village's heart beats stronger today. The square seems to stretch beyond its usual bounds, lined with temporary stalls and makeshift pens. Tents pitched hastily, but with an eye for color and flair. A red-danned, gold-striped canopy flutters in the morning breeze, and beneath it, a merchant balances jars of honey on a small wooden scale, debating with himself whether to trade for a string of dyed cloth or a pouch of silver coins. You notice the villagers' attire is a patchwork of practicality and display. Peasant women tie kerchiefs under their chins, skirts brushing the dirt, while men tug at leather jerkins and sturdy boots. Everyone is here for the same reason: the promise of something beyond the ordinary. A brief escape from chores and fields, a chance to glimpse the exotic in the familiar. You can't help but grin as a pair of lads chase a piglet through the square, their laughter mingling with the crowing of roosters. There's a hint of organized chaos, and you find yourself wondering how they coordinate it all. Historians still debate whether medieval fairs were tightly regulated by local lords or largely left to the citizens. Some fringe accounts suggest that early fairs were almost anarchic, with impromptu jousts, street performances, and even small-scale disputes erupting spontaneously. You trudge past a pile of hay where a horse lazily chews. Watching a boy try to balance on the edge of a barrel, he wobbles, topples, and lands in a soft heap, laughing along with the crowd. A cart rattles by, laden with barrels of ale. You catch a whiff of the sweet, yeasty aroma and briefly fantasize about the taste, though you know the morning might not be the ideal time for drinking. Still, the promise hangs in the air, teasing the senses. Nearby, a woman lays out colorful linens, neatly folded in triangular piles, their bright dyes almost shocking against the drab earth tones of the village. Another merchant sets out an assortment of wooden toys: carved horses, spinning tops, and a hedgehog caged in a wicker basket. You stop, squinting at the prickly little creature. Quirky, you think. Why would anyone want a hedgehog at a fair? Apparently, these tiny creatures were believed to bring good luck, or at least provoke curiosity, which seems just as useful in the bustling square. You wander deeper into the throng, feeling the textures of the village life pressing against your skin. Rough cloths, smooth wood, and the occasional feather brush passed as children dart between adults. You notice a man carrying a satchel full of small bottles, each labeled with mysterious herbs. A fringed tidbit whispers in your mind: some of these concoctions were thought to cure everything from a headache to a dragon bite, though you hope for both your sake that the latter is strictly metaphorical. Historians still argue whether villagers genuinely believed in these remedies, or if they were mostly theatrical gestures, designed to impress and sell. The square opens up, and you find a spot on the edge, observing the slow swell of the crowd. Traders shout their wares, acrobats stretch and limber, and musicians test their instruments, drawing the first curious listeners. You feel the anticipation in your chest, a little like the flutter before a modern festival or sports game, only muddier and smellier, with far more chance of being jostled by a stray goat. A scent of fresh bread wafts past again, and you realize it is now impossible to ignore that gnawing hunger you forgot about when you first arrived. Above the cacophony, a bell rings from the village chapel, signaling the morning hour and perhaps the official start of the fair. You glance at it, appreciating the small detail that despite the chaos, some structure underpins the day. Life in a medieval village might seem haphazard from the outside, but there's an invisible choreography at play. Each participant, from the burly blacksmith to the tiniest toddler, plays a role in the grand performance of commerce, entertainment, and social bonding. You take a slow breath, letting the sights, smells, and sounds imprint on your senses. The fair is alive. Every shout, squeal, and strum of a string seems purposeful, part of a larger rhythm that pulses through the village. And as you step forward, ready to explore the stalls, the musicians and the storytellers, you feel a mix of excitement and curiosity. The day is young, the sun is climbing, and already the promise of ale, music, and tales of wonder beckons. You weave through the growing throng, eyes drawn to the kaleidoscope of tents and stalls lining the square. Merchants hustle, shouting in melodic accents that hint at faraway towns, while the scent of roasting meats and fresh bread pulls you in like a magnet. The vendors are already busy arranging their goods, folding linens, stacking wheels of cheese, and carefully balancing baskets of apples so that each one seems perfectly ripe under the morning sun. Some stalls are simple, just a table and a cloth, while others are elaborate, decorated with painted banners, feathers, or carved wooden motifs. You notice one particularly ambitious merchant has fashioned a small, rotating display of carved wooden figures, tiny knights, farm animals, and mythical creatures spinning gently as if they have a life of their own. You pause to watch a young girl attempt to sell flowers she's gathered from a nearby meadow. Her petals are slightly wilted, but she smiles so broadly that passers-by can't resist taking a bouquet. There's a charm to the simplicity here, a quiet magic in the way ordinary items are elevated to treasures for the day. Meanwhile, a merchant from a neighboring town sets out a display of silks, colors so vivid they almost hurt to look at in contrast with the earthen tones of the village streets. Fringe sources claim that some of these fabrics were said to be dyed with ground insects or rare plants, and a tiny number of wealthier villagers would pay handsomely just to possess a fragment. You feel the urge to touch the silk, imagining how impossible it must have seemed to own such luxury in daily life. As you wander, you notice that some of the stalls are almost theatrical in their presentation. One merchant has caged hedgehogs, which draw more curious glances than the practical goods on display. It's odd, yes, but you can't help but smile at the idea that even back then, people loved a bit of spectacle. The little creatures twitch and sniff, and children gather, pointing and giggling as their parents haggle nearby. The hedgehogs seem almost like mascots of curiosity, proving that even centuries ago, people appreciated the power of something cuter, at least prickly, to grab attention. Historians still argue whether these unusual animals were sold as pets, charms, or simply conversation starters. You drift toward a stall displaying an assortment of spices. The colors alone are mesmerizing: fiery reds, deep oranges, mustard yellows, and earthy browns, all arranged in neat pyramids. The merchant waves you over, offering a sniff of cinnamon and a pinch of saffron. You inhale deeply, transported for a moment to distant lands where these spices originated, imagining the long journeys over rough seas and perilous roads that brought them here. The quirky tidbit that some traders might have slipped in powdered unicorn horn alongside real spices makes you chuckle. Whether believed to cure ailments or just sold for profit, it adds a playful mystique to the market. Scholars debate how much of the average villager's understanding of these exotic goods was based on fact, and how much was fueled by imagination or clever marketing. Nearby, a blacksmith's stall draws your attention with the rhythmic clang of hammer against anvil. Sparks fly as he shapes iron, forging nails, horseshoes, and knives with a practiced hand. You watch as he holds a red-hot blade and tongs, quenching it in water with a hiss that makes your ears ring slightly. The air smells sharply of smoke and molten metal, mingling with the sweeter aromas of the baked goods. A fringe tidbit whispers that some blacksmiths would etch small protective symbols into their blades, hoping to ward off bad luck or curses. You can't tell if this is superstition or marketing, but it fits the fair's atmosphere perfectly. You meander past stalls brimming with wooden toys, spinning tops, miniature carts, carved animals, all laid out as if daring you to imagine yourself as a child again. A hedgehog in one basket twitches its nose, and you remember the earlier stall. These little quirks pepper the fair with unexpected delights. You feel a nostalgic tug, thinking about how even today, small, whimsical objects can capture attention far more effectively than anything practical. The medieval villagers clearly understood this instinctively. At a nearby tent, a woman arranges pottery, jugs, bowls, and plates, each glazed in soft, earthy tones with simple painted designs. You pick up a small cup, feeling its cool surface in your hand. The glaze has a slight unevenness, a tiny imperfection that makes it feel handcrafted and personal. A fringe story notes that some potters believed certain patterns would bring good fortune or even protect against illness. You imagine them whispering these secrets to buyers, weaving a subtle narrative that elevated the pottery from simple utility to something meaningful, almost magical. The energy in the square continues to swell as more villagers arrive. Farmers drag wagons of freshly picked vegetables, while bakers balance trays of bread and pastries. You notice that the larger the stall, the louder the merchant's voice becomes, almost a theatrical performance in itself. Some haggling includes playful insults, part of the ritual of buying and selling. Too greedy, sir. That coin is lighter than your head. You overhear, and you can't help but grin. Oddly, this verbal sparring is as much entertainment as it is commerce, blending business with performance. Historians still argue how much of this was genuinely necessary for trade, and how much was ritualized fun designed to keep the crowd engaged. The morning sun climbs higher, warming your back, and you realize that your boots are already dusty from the uneven ground. Children weave between legs, carrying small trinkets or handmade toys. You see a man balancing an assortment of herbs and tinctures in delicate bottles, each labeled with fantastical claims. A quirky note: some of these concoctions supposedly warded off invisible spirits. Minor illnesses or even misfortune in love, whether they truly worked or not, you can't help but be amused by the creativity of these remedies. Finally, your gaze drifts to a row of baked goods arranged with precision. Honey cakes glisten with syrup, flatbreads are stacked high, and pastries with nuts or fruit seem impossibly decadent. The smell is intoxicating, and you remind yourself to eat before sampling any ale. Later, though the temptation is strong. You lean closer, noticing tiny decorative touches. Almonds shaped like stars, powdered sugar sprinkled in delicate swirls, patterns that could almost be modern art. The care taken by bakers reveals that even in a practical medieval world, aesthetics mattered. You move along, feeling the tactile, aromatic, and visual textures of the fair pressing in from all sides. Each stall has its own rhythm, its own story to tell, and its own charm. The hedgehogs, the silk, the spices, the baked goods, they all coalesce into a sensory tapestry that is almost overwhelming in its richness. A fringe tidbit flits into your mind. Some fairs included items so bizarre that the villagers debated whether they were authentic or magical. You can't help but smile at the thought, realizing that curiosity and wonder are timeless, bridging centuries effortlessly. With the stalls fully set and the villagers moving comfortably among them, you finally pause to take it all in. The fair is alive, not just as a marketplace, but as a stage, a theater of daily life turned extraordinary. You realize that these simple setup stands, tables, barrels, and baskets, enough to create a sense of excitement, novelty, and community. Historians still argue whether the design of these fairs was accidental, organic, or intentionally theatrical. But standing here, amidst the colors, smells, and sounds, you don't really care. The fair has captured you, body and mind, and you know that every stall you pass from here on will be another story, another sensory delight waiting to be explored. You pause for a moment, letting your senses adjust to the bustle, and then your attention shifts to the soundscape unfolding around you. The square vibrates with music. Flutes, trill, fiddles, squeak joyfully, and the occasional bagpipe drones its way through the morning. Each instrument has its own character, weaving into a patchwork of sound that seems almost chaotic, but somehow carries a rhythm that the crowd instinctively follows. You find yourself tapping your foot, swaying slightly, caught up in the pulse of it all. A fringe observation whispers that some of these instruments were designed not just to entertain, but to physically energize the crowd, or even mark boundaries in competitions. Pounding so that everyone could hear over the din of trading. Historians still debate the social role of music at medieval fairs. Was it primarily celebratory? Did it enforce order, or did it simply provide a shared backdrop for commerce and gossip? As you weave through the crowd, you notice a young musician playing a simple wooden flute, its notes light and airy, contrasting with the deeper hum of a bagpipe a few yards away. A fiddler leans into his instrument, bow gliding over strings with a mixture of precision and abandon, eyes occasionally flicking to the audience to gauge reactions. Children gather nearby, clapping and laughing at the more upbeat tunes, while adults smile knowingly, perhaps recalling dances from their own youth or just enjoying the carefree energy. The music isn't constant, it rises and falls, punctuated by the shouts of merchants, the braying of animals, and the occasional clatter of a dropped basket. Yet somehow, the combination creates an immersive rhythm, a soundtrack for the unfolding day. You move closer to a small stage constructed of wooden planks. Here, musicians are joined by a jester, who keeps time with a tambourine while telling quick-witted jokes. You chuckle at his antics, realizing that humor and music often walked hand in hand at fairs. One peculiar bit of trivia drifts into your mind. Some jesters used exaggerated facial expressions or loud hats, not just for comedy, but as a way to capture attention in the densely packed, noisy crowd. The line between performance and communication was blurred, a practical choice that also entertained. Historians still argue whether jesters and musicians were considered equal participants in the fair's social hierarchy, or if their roles were more transient, ephemeral, and socially marginal. A group of villagers has gathered for an impromptu dance. Men and women join hands, spinning and stepping in patterns that seem both practiced and improvisational. You notice the laughter and occasional missteps. Someone steps on another's foot. A skirt twirls too far, but the atmosphere remains joyous, inclusive. Fringe sources suggest that some dances were deliberately designed to encourage romantic pairing or playful competition, while others might have served ritualistic or celebratory functions, a practice lost in translation over the centuries. You sway to the rhythm for a moment yourself, feeling the infectious energy of community, and marvel at how music alone can transform a muddy village square into a shared stage. Nearby, a street musician is doing something rather unconventional. He's using a series of wooden spoons, knocking them together to create percussive rhythms that echo off the surrounding walls. You can't help but marvel at the creativity. Some of the percussion patterns are surprisingly intricate, more akin to modern drum solos than you would have expected from a wandering musician. A quirky tidbit emerges. Certain itinerant performers were said to experiment with everyday objects for musical effect. From pots and pans to animal bones, blending practicality with artistry. Scholars debate how widespread these experimental performances were they the exception, or a quietly common part of fair entertainment. As the morning matures, the music shifts. More formal groups begin playing, sometimes in duets or trios, their melodies echoing the airs from neighboring towns. You recognize a rhythm that suggests a dance tune, though no one is dancing near this stage. Perhaps it's intended to lure passersby or mark the time until the next scheduled performance. Historians still argue whether these ensembles followed set repertoires or improvised heavily, depending on audience reaction. And you watch closely, trying to discern patterns amidst the lively chaos. Your gaze is drawn to a small boy, no older than 10, who clutches a drum almost as tall as he is. He strikes it enthusiastically, the deep boom mingling with the higher-pitched flutes. You smile, realizing that musical participation wasn't reserved for adults. Learning to play at fairs or community gatherings was as much social training as it was entertainment. Fringe notes suggest that some children were encouraged to participate in order to impress prospective apprenticeships or court attention from neighboring villages. You wonder if the boy notices he's become part of the living soundtrack of the fair, contributing unknowingly to centuries of shared auditory memory. Off to one side, a man strums a lute, singing quietly to himself but clearly drawing a few listeners into his orbit. The intimacy of his performance contrasts sharply with the more boisterous ensembles elsewhere, giving the square a layered quality: music for movement, music for display, music for contemplation. A peculiar observation. Some historians note that musical performers at fairs were sometimes judged as much on appearance and storytelling ability, as their actual skill. Showmanship mattered almost as much as technical mastery. You find yourself nodding along, understanding that the performance is as much about charisma as it is about melody. The sounds shift again as a small group of bagpipers joins in, their drones resonating through the air. You notice that the combination of high-pitched fiddles, mid-range flutes, and deep resonant bagpipes creates a surprisingly harmonious texture, despite the lack of formal arrangement. A quirky note: some villagers believed that certain instruments had protective properties, thought to ward off evil spirits or attract good fortune. Whether superstition or metaphor, it gives a mystical undertone to the cacophony. Historians still debate whether these beliefs influenced instrument choice or were merely a convenient embellishment for storytelling. By midday, the music has become almost omnipresent. Every corner of the square seems to hum with sound, and you realize the effect is hypnotic. The music isn't just entertainment, it is the connective tissue binding the fair together, synchronizing experiences across generations. You notice a minstrel seated on a barrel, skillfully weaving together tunes on a small harp while engaging with the crowd through nods and exaggerated facial expressions. A fringe detail: some minstrels were known to improvise songs on the spot, incorporating gossip, news, or even subtle commentary about local politics into their melodies. You lean closer, straining to catch a lyric, realizing that the fair is as much a forum for news and satire as it is a playground for music. Finally, you take a step back and absorb the auditory panorama. The music of the fair is multi-layered, alive, and fluid. It punctuates the day, energizes the crowd, and creates moments of intimacy amidst chaos. The interplay of instruments, performers, and listeners forms a living soundscape, unique to this particular village and this moment in time. Even the occasional sour note or offbeat rhythm adds character, reminding you that history isn't perfect. It's lived, messy, and delightfully human. You let your shoulders relax, letting the music seep into your bones, knowing that the soundtrack of this fair will linger in your imagination long after the drums and flutes have fallen silent. The rich aroma of baked bread and roasting meat mingles with a sharper, sweeter scent that draws you toward the ale and mead stalls lining one side of the square. You follow your nose, intrigued, and soon find yourself facing a row of large barrels, their wooden staves glinting faintly in the sunlight, each labeled in looping script that promises honeyed mead, stout ale, or the intriguingly named spiced brew. The crowd around these barrels hums with anticipation, villagers jostling slightly as they wait their turn, tankards in hand. You can practically taste the frothy foam, imagining the warmth of the amber liquid sliding down your throat. A fringe detail drifts into your mind. Some brewers added herbs or small charms to their drinks, not just for flavor, but to ward off bad luck, invisible spirits, or according to local rumor, mischievous fair goblins. Historians still argue whether the herbal additions were primarily medicinal, superstitious, or purely marketing ploys to make one tavern's ale more desirable than another's. You step closer, curious to see how villagers interact with the beverage. Men in leather jerkins and women in simple linen aprons converse easily with the brewers, laughing as they take tentative sips. A young boy, barely old enough to reach the counter, is offered a taste of sweet mead by a kindly woman, who quickly assures you both that moderation is key, though in reality, her indulgence might be more about keeping the child entertained than maintaining any real sobriety. You note that ale was a staple in medieval diets. It was often safer to drink than water, which could be contaminated. Its nutritional content, surprisingly rich in protein and carbohydrates, made it more than a social lubricant with sustenance. The barrels themselves are fascinating. Some are carved from oak, others from pine, each leaking faintly of the wood's aroma. You watch as a brewer taps a barrel, the dark liquid gurgling and frothing before being poured into a waiting tankard. You can almost hear the hiss as the air escapes, tiny bubbles forming a frothy crown that promises refreshment. Fringe accounts suggest that some villagers believed ale and mead could bring prophetic dreams if consumed in a particular kami. Order or at a certain time of day, a whimsical belief that, while likely unfounded, adds another layer of intrigue to the fare. You take a deep sniff, inhaling the mixture of malt, yeast, and whatever herbs have been added for flavor or luck. You decide to taste. The frothy ale slides down your throat, surprisingly smooth for a beverage often assumed to be coarse or harsh. You feel warmth spreading through your chest, a gentle buzz that makes the chatter around you seem even more inviting. A nearby woman raises her tankard in a silent toast, and you reciprocate, caught up in the communal energy. You realize that the act of drinking here is as much social as it is gustatory. Sharing a mug of ale or mead is participation, a ritual that binds you to the crowd in a fleeting but potent sense of unity. A few stalls down, you notice mead with hints of spices, cloves, cinnamon, and something floral that tickles your nose. You try a sip, and the sweetness lingers longer than expected, leaving a trace of honey on your lips. It's indulgent, celebratory, and oddly grounding. Fringe lore whispers that some meads were enchanted to enhance merriment, though whether that means a slightly higher alcohol content or an actual magical effect is unclear. Historians still debate whether medieval villagers had a preference for local brews versus imported drinks, weighing convenience, taste, and social prestige. You glance around, seeing villagers confidently debating the merits of each barrel, as if performing a sophisticated, tasting ritual centuries ahead of its time. You wander to a corner where the larger barrels are guarded by stout wooden barriers. Here, the ale seems stronger, the mead more potent. Villagers cluster around, tankards raised, sharing jokes and friendly insults as they sip. You overhear someone comment on the fire in this brew, and it makes you grin. A statement that might apply equally to the drink or the drinker after one or two tankards. The air is heady, filled with the combined scent of malt, fruit, and laughter. A fringe tidbit surfaces. In some villages, it was customary to toss a pinch of herbs or a small coin into the barrel as an offering, a gesture to appease spirits or ensure good luck in drinking contests. You imagine the tiny ripple of effect, centuries of superstition coexisting with the practical joy of communal drinking. As you move along, the crowd begins to thin slightly in favor of sunlit spaces for storytelling and games. But the ale and mead continue to flow. You notice a barrel with a small, handwritten sign promising herbal tonic for the brave, and curiosity nudges you closer. The brewer grins, tapping the barrel with a thick ladle, and explains that a mixture of herbs and spices might ward off colds or, at least, create the illusion of bravery. A quirky fact: some medieval brewers were known to incorporate unusual ingredients like juniper berries, mustard seeds, or even small flowers, each contributing flavor, color, or an air of mystery. You sip cautiously, the flavor sharp yet surprisingly palatable, and can't help but smile at the sense of adventure in a simple drink. Nearby, you notice a small group of villagers quietly sampling a barrel-labeled winter brew. The aroma is richer, heavier, more complex. A fringe observation suggests that stronger, spiced ales were often consumed in colder months to provide warmth and a sense of fortitude. Historians still argue whether seasonal variations were common practice or merely a reflection of what brewers happened to have on hand. You take a sip yourself, noticing the warming effect and the intricate layering of flavors. The drink seems to carry the essence of the season, a snapshot of village life captured in liquid form. You step back, taking in the scene as a whole. The ale and mead are more than mere beverages. They are connectors of people, punctuating conversations, signaling pauses, and enhancing the day's festivities. You see children being passed small sips of honeyed mead for taste, apprentices learning from older drinkers, and merchants using tankards to toast agreements or seal deals. The act of drinking is layered with ritual, community, and even superstition, a far cry from the casual, anonymous consumption of modern beverages. A fringe note whispers that some barrels were considered lucky or cursed, and villagers approached accordingly, testing their courage with a sip or avoiding them entirely. Finally, you pause to consider the sensory tapestry you've experienced. The smell of fermented grains and herbs, the froth of the ale brushing your lips, the warmth spreading through your chest, and the murmur of communal approval from those around you. Each sip is an entry into a shared tradition, a moment of connection with people centuries apart, yet united by the simple joy of tasting and celebrating together. You notice the subtle differences between barrels, the playful experimentation with ingredients, and the deliberate social choreography that drinking entails. You realize that, here, ale and mead are not just drinks, they are instruments of festivity, culture, and shared human experience. As you move away from the barrels, leaving the lingering scent of malt behind, you feel both grounded and exhilarated. The fair continues around you, music swells, children run and squeal, merchants haggle, and performers prepare, but the memory of these drinks, of their communal and sensory power, remains a steady pulse beneath the chaos. You glance back once more, watching villagers toast each other, spill some ale in clumsy joy, and savor the flavors that bind them, realizing that even a simple tankard can carry centuries of culture, superstition, and delight. You move away from the ale barrels, feeling the warmth of the sun on your back, and are immediately drawn to a swirl of motion and laughter, a cluster of performers, captivating a corner of the square. Acrobats tumble across wooden planks, flipping and twisting with astonishing agility, while jesters dart among the crowd, juggling knives, spinning hoops, and telling jokes that seem to teeter on the edge of impropriety without ever quite crossing it. You can't help but smile at the energy. There's a rhythm to the chaos, a playful choreography that keeps the audience enthralled. A fringe detail whispers that some performers would intentionally appear clumsy at first, only to surprise the crowd with sudden feats of skill, heightening the drama and making the final trick feel almost magical. Historians still debate how much of this performance was rehearsed versus spontaneous, and you watch closely, trying to guess which stunts are practiced and which are genuine improvisation. A juggler with bright ribbons tied around his ankles spins into your line of sight, tossing flaming torches high above his head. You hold your breath as each catches the light, arcs gracefully, and lands perfectly in his hands. Nearby, a young acrobat balances on a narrow beam, teetering with a precision that makes your stomach twist in sympathy. Fringe accounts suggest that some performers carried minor injuries or scars as badges of honor, visible proof of their daring, though it's impossible to know how much is legend and how much is truth. The crowd gasps collectively as the acrobat performs a flip, landing with barely a stumble. You realize that part of the thrill is knowing the slightest misstep could result in embarrassment. Or worse, but it is precisely this risk that keeps everyone, including you, riveted. The jesters weave among the audience, their exaggerated faces painted with smiles and raised eyebrows, carrying small props, wooden spoons, bells, and oversized hats. One plucks at a lute and begins a playful tune, inviting a few villagers to dance along, their feet clumsy yet enthusiastic. You notice that humor is woven into every movement. A pratfall here, a sarcastic quip there, each gesture designed to provoke laughter while maintaining the performer's skillful control. A quirky tidbit drifts in your mind. Some jesters were rumored to be privy to village gossip, cleverly weaving it into jokes so that the audience laughed at themselves without realizing they'd been observed. You smirk, realizing that humor and subtle intelligence often went hand in hand in medieval entertainment. You wander closer to the acrobat's platform, sensing a growing tension in the crowd as the performers prepare for increasingly daring feats. A man balances on stilts, taller than any horse you've seen, arms outstretched, swaying like a tree in the breeze. Children crane their necks to watch, their parents holding them gently to keep them steady. Fringe sources suggest that stilt walkers were sometimes recruited to scout crowds or entertain traveling nobles, their elevated perspective giving them both literal and figurative insight. Historians still argue whether the inclusion of dangerous stunts was intended primarily to educate or simply amuse, but the thrill is undeniable. A pair of jugglers enters the space, tossing small knives in synchronized arcs. Your eyes widen, heart thumping, as each knife spins through the air and lands back in a waiting hand with uncanny precision. A fringe anecdote hints that some performers would secretly dull the edges, though only enough to prevent real harm, ensuring the audience experienced suspense without true danger. Even so, the performance is tense and exhilarating. You notice the subtle communication between jugglers, small nods, glances, shifts in stanza, silent language honed through practice, allowing chaos to become a coordinated dance. Nearby, a small group of storytellers prepares to take the stage, their arrival marked by a shift in tone. The music dims slightly as villagers gather, curiosity replacing laughter with anticipation. The performer's energy is infectious, and you feel the pull of narrative even before the first word is spoken. A quirky observation: some storytellers were also performers, combining feats of agility or illusion with tales, creating a multi-sensory spectacle that kept audiences glued to the edge of the square. Historians still debate the extent to which these mixed performances were common versus exceptional, but the effect on you is immediate and captivating. You pause to watch a young acrobat balancing on a wooden plank suspended over a shallow pile of straw. Each careful step is met with cheers, each minor wobble with collective gasps. Fringe accounts claim that some performers used subtle psychological tricks, sudden gestures, or audience engagement to heighten suspense, drawing on instincts as old as storytelling itself. You find yourself swept up in the tension, a part of the narrative without even speaking. The square becomes a living theater, every spectator and performer contributing to the drama unfolding in the sunlight. Off to one side, a juggler tosses an assortment of items, small sacks of grain, and even a wooden mug, into the air, catching each in turn with deft precision. You marvel at the timing, imagining how many hours must have gone into mastering such coordination. A fringe fact: some juggling acts included intentional mistakes to create suspense or laughter, a subtle reminder that skill and humor often walk hand in hand. Historians still debate whether these performances were primarily designed for entertainment, social commentary, or ritualistic display. And you watch, enjoying the ambiguity. The music shifts again, blending seamlessly with the performer's actions. Flutes and fiddles weave between laughter and applause, creating a dynamic soundscape that mirrors the movement of acrobats and jesters. You notice subtle improvisation musicians responding to stumbles or cues. Performers adjusting timing based on audience reaction of fluid dialogue that transforms the fair into a living, breathing organism. Fringe sources suggest that some musicians and acrobats trained together, developing an unspoken rhythm that allowed for near-perfect synchronization. You can see it now: tiny cues, hand gestures, and glances orchestrating a chaotic yet beautiful flow. Children gather around a small puppet stage, their eyes wide with wonder as wooden figures enact dramatic tales of knights and dragons. You smile at the innocence and imagination on display, realizing that the fair's entertainment caters to all ages. Fringe accounts claim that puppets were sometimes used to mock local officials or comment on events, blending humor and social critique in ways that adults might recognize while children remained blissfully engaged. Historians still debate the extent to which puppetry served political versus purely recreational functions. And you lean in, savoring the dual layers of amusement and subtle commentary. Finally, you take a step back, letting the spectacle wash over you. Acrobats tumble, jesters grin, musicians adjust, and the crowd reacts in a continuous feedback loop of joy, tension, and amazement. The fair isn't just a place for commerce. It's a stage for human creativity, daring, and communal enjoyment. Every tumble, every note, every clever quip builds an atmosphere that is electric yet intimate. You realize that the thrill, laughter, and awe experienced here aren't so different from modern performances. The stakes feel higher, the environment's roar, and the sense of community more immediate. As you move to the edge of the crowd, you notice a small girl attempting her own balancing trick on a low beam, encouraged by her friends. A smile tugs at your lips. Performance isn't just for trained adults, it's a communal experience, a dance of skill, courage, and playful experimentation. You take a slow breath, letting the sound of applause, laughter, and music merge into a single, cohesive memory, knowing that this moment, like the ale, the stalls, and the early morning anticipation, is part of what makes the medieval fair a living, sensory adventure. You step away from the tumbling acrobats and jesters, your mind still buzzing with the echoes of laughter and the rhythmic pulse of music, and find yourself wandering toward a quieter section of the fair. Here, merchants huddle around tables stacked with goods, each stall a microcosm of curiosity and commerce. You watch as villagers examine fabrics, spices, and carved trinkets, negotiating prices with a mixture of seriousness and humor. The art of haggling is on full display. A merchant calls out, "Twilight, sir. That coin could float away with the wind." And the buyer responds with a grin, "Then it will sail straight into your purse." You can't help but chuckle. This verbal sparring is as much a performance as the acrobatics you've just witnessed. Fringe tales suggest that playful insults were sometimes more important than the actual price, a way to establish rapport and social connection. Historians still debate whether such exchanges were routine or exceptional, but observing them is like peeking into a dance of commerce that's part ritual, part entertainment. A stall displays exotic spices, deep crimson saffron, earthy cumin, and powdered ginger that curls delicately in the air when stirred. You lean in, inhaling the rich aroma, imagining the long journeys these spices have traveled from far-off lands across deserts and seas, braving storms, bandits, and rough terrain. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some traders claim to sell powdered unicorn horn alongside real spices, marketed as a cure for ailments ranging from headaches to bad luck and even the occasional love potion. Whether believed or not, it draws attention and sparks conversation, demonstrating that the fair isn't just about utility, it's about imagination, curiosity, and the delight of the unexpected. Scholars debate how aware villagers truly were of the origins and authenticity of such exotic goods, and you catch yourself wondering if you'd have believed them too. You drift to a wooden table stacked with bolts of cloth. Bright reds, deep blues, and soft yellows glimmer in the morning sun. You touch the fibers, feeling the difference between coarse, homespun, and imported silks, imagining the wealth and status required to own the finest fabrics. A fringe observation notes that some merchants displayed scraps of cloth in deliberate patterns or folded them in geometric shapes to attract attention, a primitive form of visual merchandising centuries ahead of its time. The villagers run their fingers over the fabric, tugging lightly, testing for quality, and discussing colors and textures in low, animated voices. Historians still argue whether these assessments were purely practical or if aesthetic preference played a more substantial role than we often assume. Nearby, a vendor arranges small wooden toy spinning tops, carved horses, and miniature carts. Children press their faces to the display, eyes wide, while parents negotiate prices in whispered tones. You notice a tiny cage with a hedgehog inside, twitching its nose at the curious crowd. The little creature draws more attention than some of the practical toys, reminding you of the power of novelty and spectacle. Fringe accounts suggest that unusual animals were sometimes sold as charms or status symbols rather than pets, a whimsical blend of commerce and superstition. You can't resist leaning closer, imagining the delight of a child taking home such a peculiar companion. Your attention shifts to a stall piled high with baked goods. Honey cakes, flatbreads, and pastries adorned with nuts or fruit are arranged with deliberate care, each piece almost too beautiful to eat. You inhale the sweet, yeasty aroma, feeling a pang of hunger. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Bakers sometimes added decorative touches thought to bring good luck or ensure a sweet life, blending artistry with superstition. You pick up a small honey cake, noting the uneven edges and the careful swirl of honey atop its surface. Feels handcrafted, intimate, and alive. Historians still argue how much medieval villagers valued aesthetics in daily objects versus their practical function, and you realize that here, form and function coexist seamlessly. A row of merchants offers herbs, powders, and small remedies. Some claim to cure headaches, others to protect against misfortune or minor ailments. A fringe note drifts in your mind. Powdered roots, dried flowers, and small vials of liquid were sometimes marketed as miracle cures, and some buyers genuinely believed in their efficacy. You watch as a villager cautiously tastes a drop of honey mixed with powdered herb, grimacing at the taste but hopeful for results. Historians still debate the degree to which these remedies were effective versus symbolic, but their presence adds layers of culture and belief to the fare. You pass a table with metal goods, knives, nails, and small tools gleaming in the sunlight. A blacksmith demonstrates how to strike iron, sparks flying, while the crowd leans in, fascinated. Fringe stories suggest that some blacksmiths etched protective symbols onto their products, believing it would imbue the items with luck or ward off harm. Whether superstition or branding, it gives the tools an aura beyond utility. You pick up a small knife, noting the weight and balance, imagining it in everyday use on a farm or in a kitchen. The merchant's hands are calloused, evidence of skill honed through years of labor, and you can't help but respect the craftsmanship. Nearby, a few merchants display unusual goods, powders that claim to change hair color, small charms, or odd trinkets from distant towns. Children tug at their parents, curious about the shapes, colors, and implied magic of these objects. A quirky fact: some traders used storytelling to enhance the appeal of their products, weaving tales of distant lands or mythical effects to heighten the allure. Historians still argue how much these tales were believed versus appreciated as entertainment, and you can't help but admire the cleverness involved in blending narrative with commerce. You pause to watch a small scene of haggling over a bolt of cloth. The merchant and buyer exchange words with playful insults. "That price is too light, sir." "Then you'll carry it home in your hat." Laughter bubbles up from surrounding villagers. You realize that bartering here is not purely transactional, it's performative, social, and relational. Fringe accounts suggest that haggling was an expected part of the ritual of exchange, teaching children social skills while entertaining the crowd. Historians still debate how much freedom villagers truly had in negotiating versus being subtly guided by merchants' tactics. As the morning turns toward noon, the square hums with energy. Merchants shout their wares, children weave between stalls, clutching small purchases, and villagers move with deliberate attention to colors, textures, and scents. You note the complex choreography of trade. Buyers evaluate quality, negotiate prices, assess origin, and consider practicality and whimsy, all within a dense sensory environment. Fringe tidbits whisper that some traders incorporated deliberate misdirection, placing unusual items prominently, to draw attention while hiding more valuable goods in plain sight. You step back, surveying the bustling scene, and realize that the fair is alive with strategy, performance, and human connection, each stall a microcosm of community life. Finally, you pause by a stall, selling small glass bottles filled with colorful powders. Children peek over the counter, wide-eyed, as the merchant demonstrates the contents, claiming mystical properties. A fringe story hints that some powders were harmless, while others contain subtle herbs meant to induce mild effects, like drowsiness or cheerfulness. Historians still debate how much the average villager understood the science or superstition behind these wares. You inhale the sweet and earthy scent of the powders, appreciating how even a simple object can carry narrative, mystery, and delight. As you walk away, the fair continues around you. Stalls of spices, fabrics, toys, baked goods, and curiosities intermingle with the sounds of music, laughter, and conversation. You realize that merchants do more than sell. They curate experiences, shape social interactions, and invite you into a world of discovery. Every haggle, every playful insult, every curious glance contributes to the sensory and emotional tapestry of the day. The act of trade becomes performance, exploration, and education all at once, leaving you with a sense of wonder at the ingenuity and humanity woven into the seemingly simple task of buying and selling. You leave the merchant stalls behind and wander toward the area where the fair's storytellers are gathering. Their small platforms and colorful tents promising tales of heroism, mischief, and adventure. The crowd clusters tightly, the murmur of conversation softening into attentive silence as the first narrator steps forward. You settle on the edge, feeling the anticipation hum in the air like static before a storm. A fringe tidbit drifts into your mind. Some storytellers were itinerant performers who traveled from village to village, carrying tales that evolved with each retelling, incorporating local gossip, moral lessons, or playful exaggerations. Historians still argue how much of their material was original composition versus borrowed or adapted from earlier narratives. And you lean forward, eager to find out. The storyteller begins with a low melodic voice, drawing the crowd in with rhythm and cadence that feels almost hypnotic. You notice how his hands move, punctuating key moments with gestures, pointing dramatically at invisible foes or lifting imaginary treasures. A quirky observation surfaces. Some storytellers used propstini carved figures, sticks, or scraps of fabric to enhance their narratives, creating a quasi-theatrical experience that blurred the line between oral tradition and performance. Art, you feel pulled into the story, imagining yourself alongside knights on perilous quests, mischievous tricksters outwitting greedy merchants, or villagers navigating magical mishaps. The storyteller's voice rises and falls, building tension and releasing it in satisfying waves. Fringe accounts suggest that some tales were intentionally interactive, encouraging children to shout responses, clap at moments of triumph, or participate in calendar response sequences. Historians still debate whether this interactivity was a common practice or an occasional flourish. But watching the children lean in and shout with delight, you sense its power firsthand. As the story unfolds, you notice that humor is woven seamlessly with drama. A clever joke, a sly wink, or a pratfall is integrated into the narrative, keeping the audience engaged while teaching social lessons or ethical principles. You remember the gesture from earlier, and the continuity feels natural. Humor, music, and storytelling are intertwined threads of the fair, each enhancing the other. Fringe tidbits suggest that some storytellers were also known for mild exaggeration or playful deception, claiming encounters with witches or far-off lands to heighten excitement. You can't help but smile, knowing that the audience's delight often depended on a delicate balance of truth and invention. A young boy sits cross-legged in front, eyes wide as the storyteller describes a dragon lurking near a village. You lean closer, noticing the way the boy's mouth hangs slightly open, utterly absorbed. Fringe sources whisper that children often learned cultural values, social norms, and local legends, primarily through these oral performances, long before books were widely accessible. Historians still argue about the degree to which such narratives influence behavior versus merely entertaining listeners. But observing the engagement around you, the impact seems clear. The storyteller pauses briefly, drawing a deep breath and letting the suspense linger. A hush falls over the crowd, broken only by the occasional rustle of straw or the shuffle of a curious toddler. He gestures toward an imaginary forest, describing the whispering leaves and the creatures hidden in shadow. You can almost smell the damp moss and hear the rustle of unseen paws. Fringe observations suggest that skilled narrators relied on such sensory cues to immerse listeners fully, making the story a multi-sensory experience rather than a simple verbal recounting. You take a slow breath, savoring the vividness, and realize that imagination here is as tangible as the cobblestones beneath your feet. Nearby, a small group of villagers acts out portions of the tale, improvising movements that match the narrator's descriptions. A girl mimics a frightened deer, a boy a sneaky fox, and the audience chuckles at their antics. Fringe accounts suggest that this participatory element was crucial for maintaining attention, especially among children, and also fostered a sense of communal storytelling where everyone became part of the narrative. Historians still debate the prevalence of these interactive techniques, but watching the performance unfold, it feels organic and lively, connecting past and present through shared creativity. As the tale reaches its climax, the storyteller's voice swells and the crowd leans in collectively. You notice the subtle adjustments he makes, pausing for effect, modulating pitch, pacing sentences to match the tension. Fringe tidbits whisper that skilled storytellers could hold audiences in suspense for hours, weaving multiple subplots and characters with a fluidity that rivals modern serial narratives. Historians still argue whether these performances were typically formalized or improvised, but the impact is undeniable. You feel yourself carried along, as if time itself has slowed, and the fair exists only within this bubble of imagination. After a particularly dramatic twist involving a clever trickster outwitting a greedy noble, laughter erupts from the audience. Children clap, adults shake their heads with knowing smiles, and the storyteller bows slightly, acknowledging the shared joy. Fringe observations note that humor often served to balance tension, reinforcing lessons while keeping the atmosphere lively. Historians still debate whether these narrative structures were consciously designed for moral instruction or evolved naturally from centuries of oral tradition. You realize that, either way, the storytelling is a crucial social glue, binding listeners together in laughter, suspense, and shared memory. Nearby, another storyteller sets up, this time focusing on tales of local heroes, miraculous events, and supernatural occurrences. You notice a rhythm emerging across storytellers: suspense, humor, moral lesson, and repetition that allows the audience to absorb, react, and anticipate. Fringe accounts suggest that some storytellers specialized in ghost stories or cautionary tales to entertain and instruct simultaneously. Historians still debate how standardized these genres were, but watching the captivated crowd, you understand that variation within familiarity kept the fair dynamic, engaging, and culturally resonant. You wander to the edges of the storytelling circle, noting how the audience reacts differently depending on the tale and the narrator's style. Some listeners lean forward, eyes bright, while others relax into the warmth of the sun, savoring the cadence and rhythm. Fringe sources hint that some storytellers subtly adapted their material to suit the preferences of specific audiences, changing characters or plot details on the fly to heighten engagement. Historians still argue how much oral tradition was codified versus improvised, and you find yourself marveling at the artistry, skill, and social intelligence required to maintain such a performance. As the day stretches on, the storytellers' voices mingle with the distant clatter of ale mugs, the laughter of acrobats, and the hum of merchants negotiating. You realize that storytelling isn't an isolated art form. Here it is woven into the fabric of the fair, complementing music, commerce, and performance. Each tale adds depth, humor, and shared cultural knowledge, creating a multi-layered sensory experience that is both entertaining and socially meaningful. Fringe observations suggest that some stories were remembered for generations, subtly shaping local identity and collective memory. Historians still debate the durability of oral versus written narratives, but standing in the square, you feel the power of story alive and palpable, carrying lessons, humor, and wonder across centuries. Finally, you step back, letting the music, laughter, and tales wash over you. The square is alive in every sense: sight, sound, smell, and feeling. The storytellers have transformed simple words into living worlds, each performance a fleeting but memorable contribution to the communal life of the village. You realize that the magic of the fair is as much in the shared imagination as in the tangible sights, tastes, and sounds. With a slow breath, you savor the richness of this human experience, knowing that storytelling, like music, ale, and commerce, forms an essential thread in the vibrant tapestry of medieval village life. You drift away from the storytelling circle, your mind still humming with dragons, tricksters, and clever plot twists, and are drawn toward the smell of roasting meats and fresh-baked goods. The aromas mingle in the air, making your stomach rumble with anticipation. Villagers cluster around long wooden tables laden with meats, pies, and steaming bread, everyone eating with hands, knives, or simple wooden spoons. You notice that the act of dining here is as much social as it is nutritional. People lean in, speak animatedly, and share bites, passing small morsels across the table. Fringe tidbits suggest that communal eating reinforced village hierarchies subtly: who sat where, who received the first portion, and who was invited to taste the more expensive delicacies. Historians still argue how much of these rituals were strictly codified versus fluid social customs. A man carves a roasted goose with impressive skill, slices falling neatly onto a wooden platter. You step closer, inhaling the rich aroma of roasting fat and herbs, feeling a pang of envy for whoever will get the first bite. A quirky fact drifts in: medieval cooks sometimes used spices not only for flavor, but to preserve meat longer in warmer months, giving rise to intricate seasoning practices that seem indulgent today, but were practical necessities then. You notice a woman sampling a small pastry filled with curd and honey, her eyes closing as she savors the sweetness, reminding you that the pleasures of taste transcend centuries. The crowd hums with conversation, laughter, and the clatter of wooden utensils on plates. Children tug at their parents, eager for a taste of the more decadent treats: honey cakes, sugared buns, and small meat pies. Fringe observations suggest that sweets were rare and considered special treats, often reserved for fairs, religious festivals, or notable celebrations. Historians still debate how widespread access to sugar and honey actually was, but the excitement in the children's eyes suggests that the novelty and delight were universal. Nearby, a small group of villagers participates in a roasting demonstration, watching a cook baste meat over an open flame. Sparks rise and drift in the sunlight, creating a spectacle that blends practicality with performance. A quirky tidbit: some cooks were known to perform flamboyant gestures while preparing food, both to entertain and to showcase skill, turning simple cooking into a form of theater. You step closer, imagining the smell of herbs, smoke, and roasting flesh enveloping the entire square. an olfactory symphony perfectly attuned to the rhythms of the fair. You watch as plates are passed around and notice the communal aspect of eating. The exchange of food mirrors the exchange of goods at the stalls. Everyone shares space, flavor, and experience. Fringe accounts hint that food sharing could even serve as social bonding or subtle negotiation, with generosity enhancing reputation and influence within the village. Historians still argue whether these practices were conscious strategies or simply evolved naturally from communal necessity. But the effect is palpable as laughter and conversation flow alongside bites of roasted meat. The smells shift as you approach a stall baking fresh bread. Loaves of various sizes are pulled from an open oven, golden crusts steaming in the morning light. You lean in, tasting a crumb of soft bread, warm and slightly sweet. Fringe details suggest that some bakers used aromatic herbs such as rosemary or thyme, not just for flavor, but to delight and calm the crowd, creating a multi-sensory experience that combines sustenance and subtle entertainment. Historians still debate how widespread such practices were, but the effect on you is immediate. Aroma, warmth, and taste converge into a memorable moment. You notice a small gathering around a cook demonstrating pie making. She rolls dough with precision, fills it with spiced meat and fruit, then seals it with delicate crimping. Children watch, entranced, while adults comment on technique and seasoning. A quirky tidbit: some medieval pies were deliberately overstuffed to create dramatic appearances, emphasizing abundance and skill, turning even ordinary fare into a spectacle. Historians still debate the extent to which presentation versus taste guided culinary choices. But watching the crowd, you realize that visual delight is nearly as important as flavor in this communal setting. Off to one side, a man offers samples of spiced cider in wooden cups. You take a tentative sip, savoring the warmth and temps. Noticing the subtle complexity of flavor achieved with simple ingredients. Fringe accounts suggest that fermented beverages served multiple purposes: hydration, nutrition, and light intoxication, creating a gentle buzz that encouraged conversation and relaxation. Historians still argue whether these beverages were consistently safe or occasionally dangerous. But in the context of the fair, the mood is convivial, uniting participants in shared sensory enjoyment. You drift toward a quiet corner where villagers are enjoying small, sweet tarts and honeyed nuts. The colors and textures are captivating: golden crusts, deep amber syrups, and sparkling sugar crystals catching the light. Fringe observations suggest that the presentation of sweets often carried symbolic meaning for prosperity, nuts for fertility, and spices for protection. Historians still debate how much symbolic reading of food was conscious versus incidental, but the ritual of tasting, sharing, and enjoying is unmistakable. You nibble on a small tart, savoring both the flavor and the sense of tradition embedded in the act. Nearby, a communal table is set for a more formal demonstration of cooking skill. Cooks show off roasted birds, seasoned meats, and elaborately decorated pies. You notice the interplay between performance and utility. Skill is demonstrated not just for sustenance, but to impress, entertain, and instruct. Fringe details suggest that some demonstrations were deliberately theatrical, incorporating small flourishes like tossing herbs or flambeing small dishes. Historians still debate whether these displays were intended for social instruction, competitive display, or pure entertainment. You watch, mesmerized, as each motion is precise, deliberate, and aesthetically pleasing, turning cooking into an art form. Children run past, carrying small pastries, occasionally dropping crumbs that attract a flurry of birds and cats. You smile at the liveliness, appreciating the intertwining of food, play, and community. Fringe anecdotes hint that animals were sometimes incorporated into the fair's experience intentionally, whether to amuse, teach, or maintain order through natural deterrence. Historians still debate how intentional or symbolic these interactions were, but observing the scene, you see the rich layering of activity, sensation, and social rhythm that defines the medieval fair. As midday shifts toward afternoon, the food smells mingle with the distant music, the laughter of acrobats, and the clamor of merchants, creating a full sensory mosaic. You pause to absorb it, the warmth of roasted meat, the sweetness of honeyed cakes, the temps of cider, the sound of music and conversation. Fringe observations suggest that the combination of food, performance, and commerce was carefully orchestrated, or at least naturally aligned, to maximize engagement, delight, and social cohesion. Historians still argue whether fairs were primarily economic, cultural, or social phenomena, and standing here, you realize the answer is all of the above. Finally, you step back, taking in the panorama. Villagers sharing meals, children laughing over crumbs, cooks displaying skill and artistry, and the background pulse of music and storytelling weaving everything together. You feel grounded, nourished, and part of a living, breathing community, even as an observer centuries removed. The fair is a place of sensory richness, human ingenuity, and communal delight, where food, drink, and entertainment converge into a seamless experience, leaving you both satiated and inspired. You breathe in deeply, savoring the lingering aromas, and feel gratitude for the simple yet profound joy of shared sustenance amidst the ongoing festival of life, sound, and story. You leave the savory sense of the cooking area behind, feeling both sated and curious, and wander toward the open space where games and competitions have gathered a lively crowd. Villagers of all ages cluster around, cheering, laughing, and wagering small coins or favors as participants try their hand at skill-based challenges. You notice an archery range first. A long wooden frame holds straw targets, and a line of eager contestants draws their bows with careful focus. The twang of string and the satisfying thump of arrows hitting the target punctuate the chatter of the crowd. Fringe accounts suggest that local competitions sometimes included playful sabotage, like placing slightly heavier arrows in a pile or teasing inexperienced participants with exaggerated guidance. Historians still debate how widespread such mischief was, but watching the focus and excitement, you feel the tension and joy firsthand. A young boy takes aim and releases an arrow that arcs beautifully before embedding in the target's center. Cheers erupt, echoing across the square. Nearby, another child misses entirely, sending the arrow skittering into the dirt. Laughter follows, light and teasing, yet the atmosphere remains encouraging. A quirky fact drifts in. Archery contests were sometimes used to train future militia members, blending recreation, skill development, and subtle socialization. Historians still argue how formalized these practices were, but observing the villagers, you see that fun and practicality intertwine seamlessly here. You wander toward a series of wooden games: ring toss, cup and ball, and simple board-like competitions carved into flat planks. Villagers lean over, concentrating on their throws and spins, while onlookers cheer and offer playful advice. Fringe tidbits hint that some games incorporated hidden rules or superstitions, like always starting with a particular hand or offering a small coin to ensure luck. Historians still debate how much chance versus skill dominated these competitions, but the engagement is genuine, and you feel a part of the communal excitement even as a spectator. Nearby, a mock wrestling match is underway on a patch of straw. Young men grapple, twisting and trying to pin one another in displays of strength and strategy. The crowd cheers, encouragement, and groans in reaction to near victories. A quirky observation: some contests had informal referees, usually older villagers who would intervene with exaggerated gestures or humorous commentary, keeping the competition safe yet lively. Fringe accounts suggest that minor injuries were not uncommon, but the risks were part of the spectacle and camaraderie. Historians still argue whether wrestling matches were purely recreational or also served as informal demonstrations of physical prowess with social consequences. You notice a simple course set up for races, marked with sticks and string. Children dash across, tripping and laughing, while parents cheer them on. You feel a swell of nostalgia, realizing that the joy of running, competing, and playful rivalry transcends centuries. Fringe sources whisper that some races included hidden obstacles or tasks, like carrying a small pouch of coins or balancing a wooden spoon with an egg, designed to amuse onlookers and test coordination. Historians still debate how codified these obstacle races were, but the effect is clear: laughter, engagement, and a sense of shared challenge. A group gathers around a coin-tossing game. Small discs are flung toward a target marked in concentric circles. You notice how the villagers lean, tense, and celebrate each near hit with exaggerated gestures. Fringe observations suggest that some participants secretly marked coins to improve tracking or luck, blending skill, superstition, and strategy. Historians still debate the prevalence of such practices, but the sense of playful competition resonates, showing that games are not just pastimes, but subtle cultural rituals. Nearby, a small archer-inspired game uses scaled-down bows and soft arrows. Children line up, drawing the miniature bows with concentration. The sound is gentler than the full-sized range, yet the excitement is just as intense. Fringe anecdotes hint that games for children often mimicked adult competitions, subtly training skills while entertaining. Historians still argue whether these early games were primarily instructive or recreational, and you watch as the children cheer for each other, learning through participation. Across the square, a contest of strength involves lifting stones and carrying sacks. Villagers measure prowess with feats of endurance, often punctuated by laughter and friendly mockery. Fringe accounts suggest that public displays of strength reinforced social bonds, status, and reputation. Though historians still debate whether these rituals were conscious hierarchy tools or informal amusement. You feel a quiet thrill observing the effort, pride, and cheering, appreciating how competition intertwines with social cohesion. A juggler has wandered into the game area, tossing balls to distracted competitors, drawing laughter and light frustration in equal measure. Fringe tidbits claim performers sometimes incorporated games into their acts, blurring the line between entertainment and sport. Historians still debate how integrated performers and competitions were. But here, the overlap is seamless, enhancing the fair's playful atmosphere. You watch villagers, young and old, juggling skill, luck, and patience in equal measure, appreciating the layered experience of play, spectacle, and sociality. You move toward a small area where storytelling overlaps with games. Riddles and puzzles challenge villagers to solve problems aloud, often earning small tokens or recognition. A quirky observation surfaces. These mental contests were sometimes designed to reinforce cultural knowledge. Oral traditions or moral lessons subtly embedded within the riddles. Historians still debate the educational versus entertainment value of such games. And you find yourself smiling at the clever interplay of wit, insight, and communal observation. As the afternoon stretches on, the fair hums with layered activity. The soundscape is a symphony of laughter, music, clinking tankards, shouted instructions, and playful teasing. You notice that games, competitions, and demonstrations provide a rhythm to the day, punctuating meals, storytelling, and performances. Fringe tidbits suggest that organizers intentionally sequenced activities to maintain energy, engagement, and communal bonding. Historians still argue how deliberate versus emergent this structure was, but as a participant observer, you feel its effect unmistakably. The fair is immersive, playful, and alive with human interaction, skill, and joy. Finally, you pause to take it all in. Archery, wrestling, racing, tossing games, and riddles form a vibrant tapestry of movement, sound, and social exchange. You see the joy in participants' faces, the teasing glances between friends, the laughter echoing from parents and children alike. Fringe observations note that the energy of games often spread to adjacent areas, enhancing music, commerce, and storytelling, creating a holistic experience that immerses every sense. Historians still debate the social functions versus entertainment value of these games. But the communal thrill, shared effort, and celebratory atmosphere are evident. You take a slow breath, feeling the pulse of centuries-old human delight, and realize that even as a visitor from another time, you are carried along in the joyous current of medieval village life, where skill, chance, and camaraderie merge seamlessly in a living, breathing festival of play. You wander from the games, feeling your legs pleasantly tired from walking through the bustling square, and notice that the light is beginning to soften, stretching shadows across cobblestones and wooden stalls. Evening approaches, and with it, a gentle shift in the fair's atmosphere. Lanterns are being lit, their soft amber glow flickering over tents, tables, and the smiling faces of villagers. You inhale the faint smell of smoke from the torches mingling with the lingering aroma of roasted meats and fresh bread. Fringe tidbits suggest that evening lighting was sometimes intentionally designed to enhance atmosphere, create mystery, and extend the fair into a magical sensory experience. Historians still debate how widespread the use of lighting as ambience truly was, but watching the soft glow, you feel the day's energy transform into a more intimate, enchanting rhythm. A small group gathers around a wooden stage for musical performances, instruments glinting in the lantern light. Fiddlers, flutists, and small drum ensembles begin to play, creating a lively yet mellow soundtrack for the evening. You notice how the music interacts with the crowd, drawing some to dance, encouraging others to sway, and subtly influencing the pace of conversation. Fringe accounts suggest that musicians often adjusted tempo and style based on the audience's energy, improvising subtly to maintain engagement. Historians still argue how codified musical performance was in village fairs, but the improvisational energy here feels both deliberate and natural. Nearby, a storyteller prepares a quieter, reflective tale. You lean in as the tale begins with soft words, punctuated by the gentle strum of a lute. The story weaves through human experience, loss, humor, and cleverness, capturing the attention of listeners who have been on their feet all day. Fringe details hint that evening storytelling often featured more reflective or mystical narratives, allowing villagers to wind down, contemplate, and engage in shared reflection. Historians still debate whether this timing was intentional or emerged organically from social rhythm. But the effect is unmistakable. A gentle lull in the fair's energy, offering respite and introspection. You drift toward a small corner where the local alehouse has extended its presence outdoors. Wooden benches are crowded with villagers sipping from mugs of frothy ale or cider. You notice laughter rising in gentle waves as conversation mixes with clinking mugs and casual debates about market goods, village news, or previous competitions. Fringe anecdotes suggest that alcohol served multiple social functions, from facilitating conversation to softening hierarchies and smoothing negotiations. Historians still debate the exact social norms surrounding drinking in medieval fairs, but the conviviality is evident. People relax, share stories, and bond over familiar beverages, reinforcing communal ties at the day's end. A pair of acrobats perform loresque feats on a small platform near the alehouse, flipping and balancing without the dramatic risk of earlier displays. You appreciate the contrast. The spectacle now is light, entertaining, and leisurely, harmonizing with the evening's gentler rhythm. Fringe sources suggest that evening performances were intentionally less risky to accommodate tired spectators, maintain safety, and provide a soothing conclusion. Historians still debate whether this moderation was a deliberate part of fair planning, but the audience's contentment tells you the approach works beautifully. You move along the lantern-lit pathways, noting small children nestled against their parents or lying on blankets with simple treats. Their laughter is quieter, punctuated by whispered observations of flickering flames and shadowed corners. Fringe details suggest that evening was when families consciously slowed down, using the fading light to transition from active play to communal reflection. Historians still argue whether these transitions were guided by tradition, necessity, or natural human circadian rhythm. But you can see the effect. The fair gradually transforms from bustling spectacle to cozy, shared experience. A storyteller concludes their tale with a flourish, and a ripple of applause spreads through the gathered crowd. Villagers share quiet remarks, nod or smile knowingly at references to earlier jokes or tricks from the day. You notice the cumulative effect. Each performance, meal, game, and exchange has layered upon the last, creating a rich tapestry of memory, sensory input, and social bonding. Fringe observations suggest that fairs were designed, consciously or not, to produce this layered communal experience. Historians still debate how intentional such structuring was, but standing here, you feel its coherence as an undeniable pattern. The musicians begin a slow, lilting piece, and couples rise to dance with gentle movements, laughter bubbling quietly beneath the melody. Children watch, fascinated, occasionally mimicking the steps or spinning in place. You realize that dance, like music, storytelling, and games, is both entertainment and subtle social instruction, teaching rhythm, coordination, and social cues. Fringe sources hint that some evening dances incorporated playful challenges or friendly competitions, further blurring the lines between play and socialization. Historians still debate the prevalence and function of these practices, but you feel the continuity of communal learning and enjoyment. Nearby, small fires are lit for warmth, and villagers gather around them in tight circles. The soft crackle of flames, the hum of conversation, and the occasional burst of laughter combine into an almost hypnotic ambience. Fringe anecdotes suggest that firelight served not only for warmth, but as a focal point for intimacy, storytelling, and quiet reflection. Historians still debate the symbolic versus practical purposes of these evening rituals. But watching families, friends, and neighbors cluster around, the effect is clear. A slow, calming transition from day's excitement to evening's gentle closure. Finally, you take a step back, breathing in the full sensory palette of the evening. Lantern light, aromatic smoke, the low murmur of conversation, the gentle strum of music, laughter, and the soft patter of children's feet. Fringe observations suggest that these combined elements, music, story, dance, games, food, drink, and social interaction, function together to produce a holistic experience that reinforced community bonds, cultural continuity, and human delight. Historians still debate whether such synchronization was planned or emergent, but you feel it fully. A living, breathing tapestry of medieval village life, vibrant, warm, and intoxicatingly human. As night deepens, you sense that the day's experience is the ale, the music, the storytelling, the games, the commerce, and the meals have layered into a memory you can almost step back into, vivid and enduring. Lanterns dim slightly, the crowd slows, and you exhale, content, wrapped in the atmosphere of centuries-old celebration, camaraderie, and delight. The evening softens further, and you feel the weight of a long day gently settling around you. Lanterns flicker in the cooling air, their light a warm caress against the darkening sky. You notice the subtle sighs of contentment as villagers tuck themselves closer together on benches or blankets, sharing whispered jokes and the occasional quiet laugh. The music slows, a tender hum rather than a lively rhythm, and the storytelling has given way to murmured recollections of the day's events. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the smells of roasting bread, honeyed pastries, and lingering ale fade softly, replaced by the comforting scent of straw, wood, and cool evening air. Children nestle closer to parents, their earlier excitement now a gentle pulse beneath blankets or in laps. The square, once a flurry of motion and sound, has become a serene tableau of shared human presence, a living mosaic of joy, curiosity, and quiet reflection. Fringe details suggest that this slowing of activity was as important as the day's bustle, allowing villagers to internalize experiences, connect emotionally, and drift toward restful contemplation. Historians still debate the intentionality of these rituals, yet you sense that every laugh, cheer, and whisper throughout the day has led naturally to this gentle, calming close. You take a slow, deep breath, feeling the energy of the day meld with the tranquility of the night. The warmth of human connection, the subtle flicker of lanterns, the soft strum of distant instruments, and the lingering echoes of stories and laughter create a cocoon of memory and sensation. You exhale slowly, letting the sights, sounds, and smells wash over you one last time, each element a note in the symphony of medieval village life. As your body relaxes, so does your mind, floating in the gentle rhythm of community, tradition, and simple human delight. With one final glance at the flickering square, you let yourself drift, carried by the warmth of connection, curiosity, and the quiet magic of shared moments, leaving behind the bustle but taking with you the memory of a day steeped in laughter, music, ale, and story.